Angiosperms. It is in this category that we find the most diverse species. Angiosperms, basically what I mean by that is any plant that has flowers. Any plant that produces flowers is known as an angiosperm. It is the flower, the evolution of the flower, that has led to their large success. The flower is their reproductive unit. So let's go ahead and talk about this. Angiosperms appeared about 140 million years ago. The flower is a very complex reproductive structure. So here's a picture, beautiful image of a flower. I think I have another slide where I go over all these different structures with you, but just in case I don't, I'll do so now. I'll go ahead and point out the male parts of the flower first. So here I'm showing you a bisexual flower, and what I mean by that is that both sexes are seen on this flower. You don't have to have both. Sometimes you can have just female, sometimes you can have just male, sometimes you can have both. It just depends on the angiosperm. So let's go ahead and see. The stamen is my male portion of the flower. Here I have the anther that's going to house sticky pollen grains, that male gamete, and the filament, where it's going to hold it upright. The carpel is the female portion of the flower. That's going to be the sticky stigma that's going to capture incoming pollen grains right here. The style is going to hold it upright, and the ovary is going to house the ovule at the bottom. Here's where fertilization will happen. Yeah, so I talked about the evolution of the flower. The second part is going to be the refinement of vascular tissue. You have a much more complex system of that xylem and phloem that's going to help transport nutrients to make that process more efficient. Okay. So fruit. These angiosperms produce fruit. Fruit is basically a ripened ovary. So in order for that ovary to become ripened, we need fertilization to happen via pollination. There is a difference between fertilization and pollination. I want to point that out. Some students get that confused. Let me just go back. Pollination is when incoming pollen comes in and falls on the stigma. So that can happen a number of different ways. It depends on the angiosperm. It can happen from an insect bringing that pollen over and helping that pollen grain land on the stigma. That's called pollination. Wind can help with that process and so forth. Sometimes, depending on the angiosperm, they like to self-fertilize. It just depends. So that's pollination. Fertilization is when male gamete, so that pollen, is going to meet the egg down here. So fertilization leads to a zygote forming. Pollination is needed in order for fertilization to happen in angiosperms. Okay, so basically what's a fruit? Why does the ovary do this? It's going to be a nice, beautiful way in order to provide protection, nourishment for that growing embryo. And in addition, it's going to help with seed dispersal. That's really interesting. This is going to help it diversify. So it doesn't always have to stay in one spot. Angiosperms are stationary, but because of this seed dispersal mechanism with this nice tasty fruit, animals eat it and then they excrete it somewhere else. That's going to help with the movement of those genes for that species. So it's a really neat mechanism that angiosperms have developed to do this. Animal comes in, eats the fruit, goes off, moves somewhere else to a different location, poops the seeds of that fruit somewhere else. That angiosperm can then grow there. I do want to point out that in the flower we have ovules, those smaller structures located in the larger ovary of the flower unit. It is going to be the ovule that forms the seeds. I can actually see an apple forming here, and the seeds are located in the fruit. So the ovules become the seed. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's many. It depends on the angiosperm. So here in this apple, the fruit itself is developed from the ovary.